From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
It's baffling that they can throw this down our throats, and decide to protect another country's economy versus protect our constitutional rights. I knew that I had to do something because I knew it's going to affect more than just me. It may affect also my kids. So I knew that something had to be done, and I couldn't just let it pass by.
A Palestinian-American teacher in Austin, Texas, lost her job as a speech pathologist after refusing to sign a pro-Israel oath. Now, Bahia Amawi is filing a federal lawsuit over a Texas law criminalizing support of BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions movement. We'll speak with her, as well as the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Glenn Greenwald, who first wrote about her case for The Intercept. Texas is one of 26 states with laws preventing state agencies from contracting with companies or individuals aligned with BDS. Then we speak to Temple University professor Mark Lamont Hill, who was fired from CNN after giving a speech at the United Nations in support of Palestinian rights. After an investigation, he'll remain a professor at Temple University.
An opportunity to not just offer solidarity in words, but to commit to political action, grassroots action, local action, and international action that will give us what justice requires. And that is a free Palestine from the river to the sea.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump signaled Monday he will not support a 1 or 2 week spending bill to avoid a government shutdown over the holidays, as the White House continues to demand at least $5 billion to expand the wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. Democrats have offered about a quarter of that amount. With Christmas approaching, more than 380,000 federal employees face the prospect of unpaid furloughs, while a further 420,000 so-called essential federal workers could be required to work without pay. David Cox, president of the American Federation of Government Employees, said, quote, Congress and the president should not hold agency funding hostage to controversial policies unrelated to the budget. Our members are asking how they're supposed to pay for rent, food, and gas if they're required to work without a paycheck. The holiday season makes these inquiries especially heart-wrenching, unquote. In Yemen, a UN-brokered ceasefire agreement appeared to be holding early Tuesday after a Saudi-led coalition fought pitched battles with Houthi rebels in the strategic port city of Hodeidah for a few hours after the truce was due to take effect at midnight. The fragile ceasefire comes as the UN warns tens of thousands of Yemenis are enduring famine conditions, while half of Yemen's 28 million people are on the brink of starvation. Last week, the Senate voted 56-41 to end U.S. support for the war in Yemen, but a similar bill in the House is not expected to pass this year. The Trump administration's barring the Yemeni mother of a 2-year-old boy with a rare brain disease from visiting her dying son in California one last time. Doctors have put Abdullah Hassan on life support and say the boy will not survive much longer. Abdullah and his father, Ali Hassan, are both U.S. citizens, but the boy's mother, Shaima Swileh, is a Yemeni citizen who now lives in Egypt. Under the Trump administration's travel ban, which was upheld by the Supreme Court in June, people from 5 majority Muslim countries, Iran, Libya, Yemen, Syria, and Somalia, are barred from entering the United States. The family is seeking a waiver for Swileh so she can visit her son in a hospital in Stockton, California. Ali Hassan told the San Francisco Chronicle, quote, all she wishes is to hold his hand for the last time. A federal judge is set to sentence former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who's pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about conversations he had with Russia's ambassador to the U.S. before Trump took office. In a sentencing memo filed earlier this month, Special Counsel Robert Mueller said he's not seeking jail time for Flynn, citing his substantial assistance with the probe into Russian interference in the 2016 election and at least one other investigation. On Monday, the FBI arrested two of Flynn's former business associates and charged them with illegally influencing U.S. lawmakers on behalf of the Turkish government. Prosecutors say they failed to register as foreign agents and lied to the FBI about their efforts to have the Turkish cleric, Fethullah Gulen, extradited to Turkey from his home in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania. The Senate Intelligence Committee says social media companies, including Google, Facebook, and Twitter, misrepresented the degree to which Russian trolls sought to spread fake news and sow discord ahead of the 2016 election. A pair of bipartisan reports published by the committee Monday claim Russia's government targeted African Americans in particular in an effort to suppress the turnout of voters likely to cast ballots for Hillary Clinton. The reports came as the NAACP says it'll begin a one-week digital protest starting today, organized under the hashtag #LogOutFacebook. The civil rights groups say Facebook has a history of data breaches that unfairly target users of color. It also says Facebook lacks diversity among its executives. In Nicaragua, press freedom groups have condemned the government of President Daniel Ortega after police raided the office of a journalist and government critic last Thursday, breaking open locks before seizing equipment. The raid came as Nicaraguan police also seized the headquarters of a prominent human rights group and after lawmakers outlawed 9 NGOs critical of Ortega's government. This is Carlos Fernando Chamorro, a prominent TV news host and editor of the digital newspaper Confidencial.
The objective is to silence us. The idea is they want to snuff out ideas. They want to shut up and to shut down a media outlet, but they won't succeed. We're going to continue to inform the public. We're going to continue denouncing the investigation, the abuses of the Daniel Ortega dictatorship.
In Palestine, the United Nations is appealing for $350 million in emergency humanitarian relief after the Trump administration cut funding to UNRWA, the UN relief agency for Palestinians. The UN says the funds are urgently needed for 1.4 million Palestinians, most in need of food, shelter, health care, clean water and sanitation. The appeal came as the Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, formally recognized Jerusalem as the undivided capital of Israel, even though Israel has illegally occupied East Jerusalem since 1967.
It now recognises West Jerusalem being the seat of the Knesset and many of the institutions of government is the capital of Israel. West Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. And we look forward to moving our embassy to West Jerusalem when practical in support of and after final status determination.
In May, the Trump administration drew international condemnation when it moved the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, a city that Palestinians want as part of a future state. At the United Nations General Assembly, the U.S. voted Monday against a framework agreement aimed at protecting the rights of refugees around the world. The vote on the Global Compact on Refugees was 181-2, with only the far-right government of Hungary joining the Trump administration in rejecting the Refugee Pact. Among other things, the compact seeks to find alternatives to jailing asylum seekers, especially children. The Trump administration is currently detaining about 15,000 immigrant children in government custody. In Hungary, thousands of protesters took to the streets for a fifth straight day Monday in opposition to far-right authoritarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. The protests were sparked after Orban's government created a new court system controlled by his party. Protesters are also furious over new rules that allow employers to demand their employees work up to 400 hours of overtime and giving employers up to 3 years to pay for the extra work. Critics have called the rules slave laws. This is Andy, a 26-year-old student in Budapest.
I think that discontent is growing, and with this not only anger and frustration, but also those voices which would like to make change. I think this is a process where we are trying to come up with new ideas.
Monday's protests targeted state-run TV and radio stations over their one-sided support for Prime Minister Orban. Guards ejected 2 independent lawmakers from Hungary's state television building after they demanded the broadcaster read out a petition from the protesters. Back in the United States, the Trump administration's rolling back a federal surveillance program known as Quiet Skies, but U.S. air marshals will continue to track airline passengers who they deem suspicious. In July, the Boston Globe revealed the existence of the domestic surveillance program run by the Transportation Security Administration, or TSA, which has been shadowing U.S. citizens on planes and in airports since 2012. Under the Quiet Skies program, federal air marshals collect information about U.S. travelers' common behaviors, like using the bathroom repeatedly, sleeping on flights, or sweating heavily. Under changes announced Monday, air marshals will continue to profile passengers, but will no longer report many of their observations to other intelligence agencies. CBS said Monday it'll withhold all of a $120 million severance package for Les Moonves, former chair of the media giant. Moonves resigned in September after the New Yorker magazine published an article detailing a slew of previously unreported sexual assault and harassment allegations. His resignation came as the longtime executive producer of CBS's 60 Minutes, Jeff Fager, was fired for bullying and sexually harassing women employees, and less than a year after CBS's star anchor Charlie Rose was also ousted after being accused of sexual assault and harassment. Attorneys general from 45 states are asking Pennsylvania prosecutors for information about sexual misconduct by Catholic priests, as well as efforts by the church hierarchy to cover up the abuses. This comes as Jesuit provinces in Maryland and the Midwest released the names of 84 clergy members who are credibly accused of sexually abusing children. The latest lists bring the number of Jesuits accused of sexual crimes since the 1950s to 230. In West Virginia, a high school administrator is under fire for allegedly bullying a transgender student who used the boys' bathroom. 15-year-old sophomore Michael Critchfield, who identifies as male, says he was cornered in an otherwise empty boys' bathroom at Liberty High School by assistant principal Lee Livingood, who challenged him to use a urinal to prove he's a boy, before saying, quote, "Not gonna lie, you freak me out," he said. The superintendent of Harrison County Schools has said Livingood acted inappropriately and was insensitive during the encounter. The ACLU warns that over half of trans male teens attempt suicide during their teenage years. In Missouri, a judge has ordered a serial poacher who illegally shot and killed hundreds of deer to watch the Walt Disney film Bambi at least once a month over the course of a year prison term. Authorities say over a 3-year period, David Berry Jr. left hundreds of bodies to rot after beheading the deer for hunting trophies. And in Canada, Indigenous activists who've been physically blocking the construction of the largest fracking project in Canadian history are bracing for a police raid on their encampment. Members of the Unistoten clan stopped TransCanada Corporation workers from entering their territory November 20th to work on the planned $4.7 billion Coastal GasLink pipeline, but a judge has ruled TransCanada can begin construction on First Nations land. The fight has drawn supporters from both the U.S. and Canada. In Seattle, Washington, Friday, about 60 protesters laid a 50-foot-long pipeline through the executive lobby of J.P. Morgan Chase's Pacific Northwest headquarters and created a mock oil spill in a protest against the bank's financing of TransCanada and other pipeline companies. This is Rachel Heaton, a Muckleshoot tribal member who joined the protest.
This is about our future generations, and that's why I have my 5.5-month-old boy out here, is because ultimately the decisions that these banks are making, that we're making, all all have to do with their future. And, you know, the idea of them not having clean air to breathe or clean water it's such a horrible thing to think about, but the fact that it just doesn't bother some people. And so we have to come out here and talk about this. And so really this fight isn't just about attacking the issue of pipelines, but it's also about what are we doing for our future generations.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. A Palestinian-American teacher in Austin, Texas, has filed a federal lawsuit for losing her job as a speech pathologist after refusing to sign a pro-Israel oath. Bahia Mawi is an Arabic-speaking child language specialist who had worked for 9 years in the Pflugerville Independent School District. But she lost her job last year after she declined to sign a pledge that she, quote, will not boycott Israel during the term of the contract, unquote, and that she will not take any action that is, quote, intended to penalize, inflict economic harm on, or limit commercial relations with Israel.
Before filing the lawsuit Monday, Bahia Mawi spoke to The Intercept about what happened to her.
The point of boycotting any products that supports Israel is to put pressure on the Israeli government to change its treatment, the inhumane treatment of the Palestinian people. Having grown up as a Palestinian, I know firsthand the oppression and the struggle that Palestinians face on a daily basis. You know, I have to set an example for my kids. We got to stand up for what's the justice and for right and equal opportunity for everybody and humane conditions. And so for me, it was an easy decision in that aspect. You know, I could not sign it. I was forced to depart from my job because I will not sign it, and I cannot return back if I don't sign it. I have been here in the States for over 30 years. I'm an American citizen. I follow the law. And so I have the luxury of having these rights, which many people in other countries do not have. It infringes on all my principles. And on top of that, my right to speech and also right to protest. It's baffling that they can throw this down our throats, you know, and decide to protect another country's economy versus protect our constitutional rights.
Last year, Texas became one of 26 states with laws preventing state agencies from contracting with companies or individuals aligned with the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. BDS is an international campaign to pressure Israel to comply with international law and respect Palestinian rights. However, its opponents say BDS is a thinly disguised anti-Semitic attempt to debilitate or even destroy Israel.
Democracy Now! Reached out to the Pflugerville Independent School District in Texas, which responded with a statement saying it had, quote, followed state law, which does not allow school districts to hire a contractor unless the contract contains a written verification that the contractor does not boycott Israel and will not boycott Israel during the term of the contract. The plaintiff did not agree to the contract as written. Therefore, it was unable to be executed in accordance with Texas law, unquote. Well, for more, we go to Austin, Texas, where we're joined by Bahia Mawi. In Chicago, her attorney, Gadir Abbas, is with us, a senior litigation attorney with CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Let's begin with Bahia. Explain exactly what happened and how you noticed what was in this contract. I mean, you've been teaching in the school district. This is a public school, is that right? For how long?
Yes. This is a public school, and I have been contracting with them for around 9 years. And every year I get a contract that's exactly a duplicate of the year before. And this year I got it as well, the contract at the initial start of my month, which is August, when school begins. And so I signed the initial contract. It was exactly the same as I sign every year. But then later on, a few weeks later, my speech coordinator contacted me and says, oh, Bahia, we have additional papers this year. This is brand new, and we need people to sign it. So when I received the papers, I looked through it. There was about maybe a stack of 4 sheets of paper with a bunch of new compliances and new codes. They appear to be normal job-related issues like background history, criminal history, equal opportunity of employment. until I came across the one that has nothing to do with my job, which is Code 2270.01 of the Texas Government Code. And at that one, I was reading it, and it states that currently the contractor must affirm that currently does not or will not boycott Israel, and basically, in short, causing any economic harm. So that's when I noticed. Then I right away sent an email immediately, and I stopped even reading the additional codes. And I sent an email to my speech coordinator telling her, listen, I cannot sign this. This is against my principles, against my constitutional rights. And it's also against my moral and ethical values, considering that I am a Palestinian American and I have family that actually live in occupied territory, so it affects me personally as well. So it affects me in both ways as an American citizen and as a Palestinian American too. She was kind enough. We have a really good relationship with her, and I've known everybody for 9 years, so I have a really good relationship with everybody at the school district. And she said, let me see if I can go around it. After 2 weeks, she returned back to me and apologized and said, I'm really sorry, Bahia, but they said they will not pay you if you do not sign this part of the new compliances. And so I kind of had to, forcefully leave at that point and couldn't return.
And Bahia Mawi, now were you aware that this law had been passed in Texas at all? Had you heard anything in the media about it? And why did you decide then that you needed to seek an attorney's help in challenging this?
Mm-hmm. I did not. I was not aware that this law was passed. I've heard of it in other states, but I did not know it was passed in Texas. It was kind of went under, undetected, I think. It wasn't something they advertised or talked about much in the media. And I'm not a social media person, so I'm not always online. I have 4 kids, so I'm very busy with them. So I'm not, I don't go on Facebook or look up things or anything. So I really had no aware of this new law being passed. And when I saw it, it just was unfair in so many ways. It just did not make sense. It was baffling to me and shocking that my position as a speech therapist, helping kids, with their speech and, develop with their communication in the elementary school affects any economic harm in Israel. So to me, nothing made sense at all of this. And it was a violation of everything. Violation of my freedom of speech, right to protest, my constitutional right. And so it was actually a no-brainer. I knew that I had to do something about it. And I didn't want this to grow into something more, which it can possibly, and affect, everybody, including my kids when they go to the universities. Who knows if they ask us, in a state university, if they have to sign it before registering for classes. It may grow into something more. And I knew I had to do something about it.
I want to look a little more closely at the language contained in the contract. It asks our guest, Bahia Mawi, to sign a pledge that she does not currently boycott Israel and that she will, quote, not boycott Israel during the term of the contract. The contract goes on to explain boycott Israel means refusing to deal with, terminating business activities with, or otherwise taking any action that's intended to penalize, inflict economic harm on, or limit commercial relations specifically with Israel or with a person or entity doing business in Israel or in an Israeli-controlled territory, but does not include an action made for ordinary business purposes. So let me bring your lawyer into this conversation, Gadir Abbas. This is one of 26 states that have passed similar laws. In this case, if Bahia was to simply say to a friend, I am not going to buy something that is made in the occupied territories that Israel is selling in the United States, this would make her in violation of the law?
Yeah. Bahia would be disqualified from working for any school district in the state that's following this law simply because she chooses not to buy, for instance, Sabra hummus. So her grocery store decision to not buy Sabra hummus and to buy instead another kind of hummus automatically under this law disqualifies her from all public employees, all public employment of all kinds. And here, Bahia is engaged in core protected activity that really has a hallowed place in American tradition, from boycotts against British tea, from the Montgomery boycott, from the boycott against apartheid South Africa. Bahia's actions and choices to spend her money in a particular way are expressive conduct that are protected by the First Amendment. And here, the state of Texas is siding with a foreign country's policy preferences over the needs of Bahia's students. And let's remember, here in the final analysis, Bahia's students are being deprived of their speech pathologist in exchange for accommodating the policy preferences of a foreign country. That's illegal and objectionable.
Now, Qadir Abbas, given that there are 26 states that now have similar laws in place, this legislation that has gotten very little, if any, national attention, it must indicate that there is an intensive lobbying effort going on at the state level, either by the State of Israel or by lobbying groups employed by groups in defense of the State of Israel. Do you know anything about this lobbying campaign that's been going on?
Well, it's extremely successful. In Texas, for example, it passed the legislature almost unanimously on a bipartisan basis. And yeah, these bills have passed with relatively little controversy, and it's only escalated. Congress right now, it's Ben Cardin, a Democrat, who is pushing to include a criminal version of this state law and the continuing resolution that is set to expire on Friday. And so we might have, by the end of this week, a federal law that criminalizes the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement and the activity associated with it. And here it just goes to show that for some issues, and Israel and Palestine are one of them, that the pro-Palestinian voices, the folks that are advocating for Palestinians to have equal rights, don't have necessarily an ally in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, and really must look to the activists and the movement for Palestinian rights itself to vindicate these basic rights to speak out in favor of Palestinian rights.
I'd like to turn to Texas Governor Greg Abbott speaking about the anti-BDS legislation last year in May.
Israel is one of Texas's largest trading partners. And then, of course, there is the issue about the essential international ally that Israel plays for both the United States and the state of Texas. As a result, any anti-Israel policy is an anti-Texas policy. Any boycott of Israel is considered to be un-Texan, and Texas is not going to do business with any company that boycotts Israel.
So that's Texas Governor Greg Abbott speaking about the legislation a year ago. Bahia Maui, are you an active member of the boycott, divest, sanctions movement?
I am not actually an active member of the BDS at all. Just personally for myself, if I'm aware of a product that is, supports Israel or is made in the country, then I just have I make a personal choice to avoid it because I don't want to support their ongoing occupation and aggression and then subhumane treatment of the Palestinians. That's making me kind of like a silent participant, complicit with the whole occupation. So I'm not aware of it. I didn't even go through and find out the list of things. I just happen to know about it, or if somehow I find out, then I just avoid it. But other than that, really, I'm not an active member.
And what's been the reaction of your fellow employees at the school or other teachers as well to this the results of what's happened to you in this case?
Yeah, well, So when I had to forcefully leave, I notified my coworkers, my co-evaluators, that I work on an early childhood team, which are the ones that I'm usually in association with, and they depend on me to do the Arabic evaluations. So when I told them, they were kind of shocked, because after 9 years, they were like, why? What's happening? What's changed all of a sudden? So that's when I shared with them this new compliance, and they were just disturbed as much as I was and appalled. And they supported me, and they say, we understand, and we hope you do, pursue and do something about it. So they were very encouraging and very supportive, and they were hoping that I can return eventually, which is my goal. I want to be able to go back to work again, because there's a need for a speech therapist who speaks Arabic to evaluate students who have Arabic as a second language. It is actually beneficial to be a speech therapist with another language, bilingual in another language. It's such a need all over.
Ghadir Abbas, is there any reference to any other state, any other country in this kind of contract that you have to sign, a kind of oath to another country?
No, there's no other country that's mentioned in the state of Texas law. There's no other country mentioned in any of these laws in the more than 25 states that have passed them, or the executive orders that have been issued by governors. This is only about Israel, and it really is unique in American history to have a law that specifically prevents Americans from boycotting a particular foreign country. I've never seen any kind of historical analog to what we're seeing here. And the fact of the matter, though, is that free speech rights in the United States are very well protected. And boycott activity, the Supreme Court and other courts have held over and over again, is a core expressive action that Bahia and others are welcome and entitled to take. And so whatever the state of Texas and the governor of Texas believes, and it's obviously he's cast his lot with Israel rather than Texas citizens like Bahia, who are put in the position of losing their job or advocating for their beliefs. The Constitution is designed, and the Bill of Rights exists to protect Bahia's right to protest the policies of Israel and in the occupied territories as she sees fit.
Ghadir Abbas, I want to thank you for being with us, senior litigation attorney with CAIR, the Council on American-Islamic Relations, representing Bahia Amawi and her lawsuit against the Pflugerville Independent School District and the state of Texas. When we come back, we'll be joined by the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Glenn Greenwald, who wrote about Bahia's case in The Intercept, and we'll talk about these laws around the country and what is the legal record when they're challenged in places like Kansas and Arizona. Are these laws struck down? Stay with us.
يا جذر جذري إنني سأعود حتما فانتظرني انتظرني في شقوق الصخر والأشواك في نوارة الزيتون في لون الفراش يا جذر جذري إنني سأعود حتما فانتظرني انتظرني في شقوق الصخر والأشواك في نوارة الزيتون في لون الفراش.
The Voice, the Fragrance, and the Figure by Rimbana here on Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez as we turn now to Glenn Greenwald, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, one of the founding editors of The Intercept. His latest piece headlined, "A Texas Elementary School Speech Pathologist Refused to Sign a Pro-Israel Oath, Now Mandatory in Many States, So She Lost Her Job." Glenn, why don't you talk about, exposing this story nationally? But we're talking about the law in Texas. In fact, more than half the states in the United States have a contract like she was being forced to sign if she wanted to keep her job as a speech pathologist.
So there are 26 states in the U.S. that have some version of this Texas law. They're not all as severe as the one in Texas, though many of them are. Others have various kinds of restrictions on people who boycott Israel, prohibiting the expenditure of any funds to invest in companies, for example, or in pension funds that have companies that advocate a boycott of Israel. They all have one thing in common, which is that they impose limitations on the opportunities and abilities of private citizens or private companies that support or participated in the boycott of Israel. I think the most extreme example, Amy, that actually stuns me the most is Andrew Cuomo in New York, who in 2016 issued an executive order because he couldn't get it passed through the legislature, barring New York state agencies from doing business with companies that boycott Israel, and he actually ordered them to compile a public list that would be published on a website of any companies that were found to be boycotting Israel. Yes, I can.
Well, Glenn, if you could talk further about how public do you have to be in violation of the law? If you say to a friend you're not going to buy a product from Israel because you don't want to support the occupation by the Israeli state of the occupied territories, you have to be a card-carrying member, if they have cards, of BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions Movement. What would lead you, how would a law like Texas's, when would they say you have violated the law?
So I'm not sure if you were able to hear that last answer at the end of it. I was talking about the law imposed, by Andrew Cuomo in New York, where he ordered the agencies to use public information to compile a list of companies who said they were boycotting. In the case of Texas, they're really just relying on the word of the contractor. So Bahia or others could just lie and say, I promise not to boycott Israel, even though they really are. Presumably, you could get someone fired if you find out that they really are supporting the boycott of Israel. And the point I was making about New York and other states is that at the same time that, for example, Governor Cuomo ordered a boycott or barred a boycott of Israel, 2 months earlier, he ordered his state employees to boycott North Carolina in protest of an anti-LGBT law that state had adopted. So in Andrew Cuomo's worldview and the worldview of Texas, you're allowed to boycott other American states and harm American businesses and be employed. You're just not allowed to harm or boycott this one foreign country, Israel. You can boycott Canada or Russia or anybody else. It's just special protection for Israel that not even American businesses enjoy. That's what makes it so shocking.
And Glenn, this prospect of the possibility of an omnibus budget bill being passed with a similar legislation at the national level, could you talk about that and how little attention it's gotten?
Yeah, so last year, a Democratic senator from Maryland, Benjamin Cardin, who's one of the most loyal AIPAC supporters, introduced a bill that would actually make it a crime, a felony, to participate in an international boycott of Israel. And it attracted 43 co-sponsors, 29 Republicans, 14 Democrats. And the ACLU screamed and yelled about this. They issued warnings saying this was one of the gravest threats to free speech they had ever seen. A bunch of Democratic senators who had co-sponsored it, like Kirsten Gillibrand and others, withdrew their support. But now Cardin is back with a somewhat watered-down version, but still very threatening, that's designed to uphold the state laws and also to allow financial penalties on the federal level for anyone participating in the boycott. He's trying to sneak it through a bill that has to be passed, the lame duck budget bill. So there's no separate vote on this. He would just sneak it in there. And the ACLU is trying to do everything they can to warn people of the grave threat posed by Senator Cardin and his allies to make it a federal crime to participate in the boycott of Israel.
Well, the very act of getting all of this legislation passed to prevent people from participating in the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement seems to indicate that there is a growing fear that the movement is having an impact.
Of course, it is having an impact. In fact, we now have 2 members of Congress, newly elected members of Congress, who are the first Muslim women to be elected to the Congress. They're celebrated stars of the Democratic Party, and they both explicitly support the boycott of Israel. So you have some members of the Democratic Party, like Hillary Clinton and Chuck Schumer, who say that boycotting Israel is anti-Semitic. But now you have this new generation of Democrats who are much more critical of Israel, including 2 who support the boycott. It's spread on U.S. campuses. It's spreading throughout Western Europe. There are Jewish groups who are so offended by the occupation that they now support the boycott of Israel. So you're absolutely right, Juan. The reason why there's a worldwide effort to criminalize and suppress and punish it is precisely because they worry that the same thing will happen to Israel as what happened to the apartheid regime in the 1980s in South Africa when they were targeted with an identical boycott, which is the regime and the repression finally fell. And that's what they're most concerned about.
Glenn, I wanted to read the beginning of a piece just out by University of Michigan professor Juan Cole. He writes, and he's writing about Airbnb. He says the living space sharing company Airbnb on Monday denied an allegation by the Israeli tourism minister that it had suspended its delisting of apartments in Israeli squatter settlements, which are Jewish only in the Palestinian West Bank. Airbnb has to boycott the Israeli squatter settlements because they are illegal. The European Union has for some time imposed some sorts of boycott on settlement institutions and requires the labeling of settler goods, and a full economic boycott is under consideration in countries like Ireland. He goes on to say the argument sometimes heard is that Airbnb is treating the squatters differently than it does other disputed territories. It's a stupid argument and quite dishonest, writes Professor Cole. There aren't any other countries that are keeping 5 million people stateless and without citizenship in a state and gradually usurping all their rights and property. Can you talk about this? For example, Airbnb.
The Airbnb case is really interesting because they didn't say they were going to delist all apartments or properties in Israel proper. They said only in the occupied territory of the West Bank, which the UN at the end of 2016 ruled was an illegal occupation. And one of the interesting things about the Texas law that makes it so offensive is it not only bars people from boycotting companies in Israel, but also Israeli companies in the West Bank. You're not even allowed to do the milder, more mainstream version of the boycott aimed just at the illegal settlements in the West Bank that even the UN said was illegal. And now there's a dispute. Has Airbnb really caved into the pressure and reversed their policy? Israel says they have. Airbnb is denying it. But that's where these laws that we've been just talking about come into play and are so pernicious. Imagine if you're an Airbnb executive, you could stand to lose a lot of state business because there's so many laws now in so many states, and it might be national, barring governments from entering into contracts with you as a company if you in any way boycott Israel. And this is the coordination that they're trying to impose to prevent this kind of boycott from succeeding.
We're going to break and then ask you to stay with us, Glenn. But we're going to be joined by Mark Lamont Hill, Glenn Greenwald, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, one of the founding editors of The Intercept. We'll link to his piece. Texas elementary school speech pathologist refused to sign a pro-Israel oath, now mandatory in many states, so she lost her job. This is Democracy Now! Back in a minute.
يا رفيق السهر يا عود متكي على المخمل بتتوجع وبتروح آخر دني وترجع بتكتب وتمحي حدود يا عود تارارارا 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 حكيلي عسهريات في قصور كل رخام ونوافير وتشعشع الكاسات عخصور تتلوى.
Amal Marcus here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
We turn now to look at the ongoing controversy surrounding CNN contributor and Temple University professor Mark Lamont Hill, nearly a month after CNN fired him for giving a speech at the United Nations supporting Palestinian rights.
So as we stand here on the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the tragic commemoration of the Nakba, we have an opportunity to not just offer solidarity in words, but to commit to political action, grassroots action, local action, and international action that will give us what justice requires. And that is a free Palestine from the river to the sea. Thank you for your time.
That was Mark Lamont Hill speaking at the UN on the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people in November. Just one day later, CNN dropped him as a commentator after conservatives and pro-Israel groups such as the Anti-Defamation League condemned his comments, calling them anti-Semitic. Temple University's Board of Trustees also criticized Lamont Hill's remarks, but the university has said his speech was protected by the First Amendment and that he will remain a professor.
Well, we are joined now by Mark Lamont Hill, professor of media studies and urban education at Temple University in Philadelphia, the author of several books, including Nobody: Casualties of America's War on the Vulnerable, from Ferguson to Flint and Beyond. Mark, welcome to Democracy Now! Can you talk about what you said at the United Nations at this annual event and the fallout from it, your firing by CNN?
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here. I encourage everyone to watch the full remarks. I think in a moment of sound bites and 140 or 80 characters, sometimes we can get reduced to small snippets and not get context and texture. I gave a speech at the UN, and I was attempting to offer a framework of human rights and to use that as the lens through which to make sense of, to analyze what was going on in the state of Israel, what was going on in the West Bank, what is going on throughout the diaspora, and to make an appeal for the plight of Palestinians, which was the theme of the day. Throughout the speech, again, I juxtaposed particular human rights issues or particular promises from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 to the realities of Palestinians on the ground. And at the end of that speech, I also called for a free Palestine, and I used the phrase from the river to the sea. In terms of calling for a free Palestine to the river to the sea, I was specifically calling or speaking to my belief that a one-state solution is the most fair, just, and workable possibility right now. Throughout the speech, I talked about the need for redrawing the borders, the pre-67 borders. I talked about full citizenship rights and full equal rights for Palestinian citizens of Israel, what Israelis would call Arab citizens of Israel. And I called for other kind of international measures as well to respond to injustice. At no point in the speech did I call for the destruction of Israel. At no point in the speech did I call for violence against Jewish brothers and sisters, both in Israel or around the world. That was not my content. That was not my intent. That was not the spirit of the speech. And I think, in fact, the spirit of the speech contradicts what people say that I was saying. Of course, I never want to do harm. I never want to create any sense of pain or fear or anxiety among anyone, but particularly the people I was talking about, and I mean specifically citizens of Israel or Jews throughout the diaspora. Everyone deserves to live with safety, security, self-determination, and peace. Jews are no exception to that. And so I certainly didn't mean that in the speech, but I did call for a free Palestine. And a one-state solution for me is the way to do that. Many people responded, however, and were frustrated by that or said that I was somehow secretly dog-whistling for violence. I found that a bit hard to believe. But again, part of why I'm here is to talk through that.
And Mark, the immediate response of CNN to your remarks, could you talk about their interaction with you? Also, there's a long history of solidarity between African American human rights advocates here and the Palestinian movement. So this should the fact that you are expressing this kind of solidarity should come as no surprise, even to the people who employed you at CNN.
Yeah, my conversation with CNN was relatively brief. I received a phone call, and I was told that the speech didn't match their values. I pressed a bit to find out what those values were, or what part of the speech didn't match said values. I didn't get a clear answer. I didn't get an answer at all. Just the repeated refrain, "This doesn't match our values," at which point we concluded the call. There wasn't like a long, drawn-out argument. There was no antagonistic anything. They made a decision, and I moved on. But yes, there's absolutely a long tradition of black support for Palestinians. There's a long support of black internationalism. And if we're going to be honest, there has been a long and deep support of African Americans and blacks throughout the diaspora for the state of Israel. So we can't ignore that history either. But it's a long and complicated story. But I think in the last 51 years, I would say since the Six-Day War, we've seen the black left, for sure, engage in a kind of internationalism that looks for solidarity, not just in Palestine, but with movements in Africa, movements in Latin America, an attempt to really shore up a base and a community of freedom fighters that understand that inequality and injustice is not local, but it's a transnational experience. And in order to redress any problems we have to look internationally. That's what Malcolm X was attempting to do. That's what Martin King was doing toward the end of his life. That's what the Black Panthers were doing. And when we look at current movements like Black Lives Matter, one of the first things that I found impressive about the Black Lives Matter movement was the fact that they were looking internationally.
While the president of Temple University has defended your right to free speech, the school's board of trustees has condemned your remarks. They said, quote, "That speech included a statement that many regard as promoting violence, the phrase 'from the river to the sea,' which has been used by anti-Israel terror groups and widely perceived as language that threatens the existence of the state of Israel." The members of the board of trustees of Temple University hereby state their disappointment, displeasure, and disagreement with Professor Hill's comments. That the statement from Temple. Professor Mark Lamont Hill, if you could respond and talk about what happened after you were fired from CNN at Temple, what they said.
Well, I think the statements from Temple have been fairly public, and they've been sort of litigated in the press a great deal. From my perspective, academic freedom means that we have the right to engage in public discourse, the right to engage certainly in academic discourse about issues that are of great importance, both long-term and short-term, both historical issues and current issues, both domestic issues and foreign issues, both popular issues and unpopular issues, and popular ideas and unpopular ideas. And so I imagine Temple University or any university in the United States as a space for academics to trade in ideas. And sometimes they're unpopular or controversial ideas. And I think that any attempt to intimidate or threaten or undermine academic freedom can set us on a very dangerous course. And that concerns me, not for me personally, and this isn't specifically about Temple University, but the broader academic climate that we see. The fact that it happened at Temple University was alarming to me. But ultimately, they made a decision not to give me any penalty or any punishment, which I think was the right choice. But I think a statement of condemnation, I respectfully disagree with the board, but the board has its right to do what it wants to do. I simply disagree with it. I think that also to send a message apologizing or rather condemning my particular remarks without condemning any other remarks that have been made by any other university professor at the school, including some folk very close to home who've also made controversial remarks, I think also sets a very specific precedent. So, again, I respectfully disagree with the university. The board, as private citizens, have their right to respond to my statements and to analyze or critique my statements. And I have a right to offer mine. And I'm just going to move forward and attempt to do careful, principled, and disciplined work as I've tried to do my entire career.
And Mark, in your speech, you also raised criticisms of progressives in the United States for their failure to speak out at times on the issues of Israel and Palestine. Could you talk about that as well?
Yeah, this idea of being progressive except for Palestine is something that can be problematic. I think that if we worry about injustice, we have to be concerned with injustice across the board. Doesn't mean that everybody has to target Palestine as the issue. There are many issues on the board that we have to take seriously. But if you have a position on Palestine, if you have a position on what we call the conflict, then I think to be silent on that issue, or if your position on Israel-Palestine stands in such sharp contrast to all your other ideological positions, I think that's where we get a very, very problematic. We enter a very problematic space. If I'm outraged by gentrification, if I'm outraged by the separation of families, if I'm outraged by redlining, if I'm outraged by all of these kind of domestic issues, or even American border issues, then I have to be able to take that same outrage to every part of the world. And again, it doesn't mean that we only focus on Israel, of course. I have spent a great deal of my time, particularly when I was at Huffington Post, looking at Syria, looking at Yemen more recently. I have written considerably about Saudi Arabia because I am deeply concerned. Egypt is complicit in Palestinian suffering as well. So I have to look across the board, but Israel can't be an exception. Palestine can't be an exception. And too often in the progressive movement, we have folk like Hillary Clinton who will emerge and paint themselves as a progressive figure, but resist any, forgive my earpiece falling, but will resist any criticism of the Israeli state. And I think that becomes dangerous. We have to be consistent. We have to be morally and ethically consistent.
I wanted to turn to the comment of Jewish Voice for Peace, who criticized CNN for firing you, Professor Lamont Hill. Jewish Voice for Peace said in a statement, who gets to talk about Israel-Palestine? Apparently Rick Santorum, a man who egregiously claimed there are no Palestinians in the West Bank. That's ludicrous. By firing Dr. Hill, we believe CNN is discriminating against a commentator who spoke up for Palestinian rights. They should make it right and reinstate him. Before we go back to you, Professor Hill, I wanted to bring Glenn Greenwald, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, back into this conversation. Glenn, you wrote about Mark's firing, saying CNN submitted to right-wing outrage mob. You respond.
One of the things I found most appalling and disturbing about Mark's firing, aside from the fact that it was just a blatant act of censorship by a news outlet that's supposed to allow an airing of a wide range of views, is that so many of the right-wing pundits and news outlets like Fox News that love to pretend to be defenders of free speech and throw a 3-week-long fit if a sophomore at Oberlin boos a professor that they like, said nothing about Mark's firing, just like they refused to cover the story you covered in the first part of your show about these Israel oath resulting in people's firing. That's very disappointing that so few, not just right-wing pundits, but also even centrist and mainstream Democrats were willing to speak up on Mark's behalf because of what he said, that there's so much fear about the Israel issue when it comes to mainstream liberalism.
Mark Lamont Hill, you have the last word here. If you can talk about what your plans are right now, and are there any behind-the-scenes negotiations going on right now with CNN, the possibility of you coming back?
I haven't been in any conversations with CNN. My plans right now are to continue to do the work that I've been doing, which is activism, which is writing, and which is scholarship. I'm open to possibilities, but the key for me is to have a space where we can have a rigorous, honest, principled, and humane discussion about everything that's on the table, with Israel-Palestine being no exception.
Well, Mark Lamont Hill, we want to thank you very much for being with us, Professor of Media Studies and Urban Education at Temple University in Philadelphia, and Glenn Greenwald speaking to us from Brazil, co-founder of The Intercept. That does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Is a immediate job opening for full-time social media manager here in New York City. Resumes being reviewed as received, so apply online today. That does it for the show. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Tammy Warrenoff, Sam Alkman, Malkoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Hani Masood, Trina Nadura, Taymari Astudio, and Libby Rainey. Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, our engineer. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Julie Crosby, Hugh Grand, David Prude, Arrow Boone, Vesta Godars, and Carl Markser. If you want to see transcripts, podcasts, video, or audio of our show, as well as our full week's coverage from Poland from the UN Climate Summit, go to democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks so much for joining us.